So, Kip and I wanted to ask you a question. Enough from us, we want to hear from you. What factors would need to be taken into consideration here in Gillette and Campbell County regarding carbon capture and storage for entities to gain social license to operate in your communities? What would you like everyone to take into consideration to be able to make it through all the way through phase 4? And this is the place where carbon capture is going to work. What would you like taken into consideration?
Well, I'd like to understand the energy budget for this mechanism that would be used to capture the carbon and compress it and transport it and then pressure it up again and inject it into the rock. And all of the energy that would be taken by drilling the boreholes and, I mean, the whole infrastructure, this whole big mechanism. And to overcome that would be taken from the power that is produced by that plant. So to overcome all of this, there would need to be a lot more coal burned in that plant. And so I'm wondering, what is that relationship? I'll say an analog was back 10, 20 years ago with the Clean Air and Energy Security Act, when the ethanol, the gasohol was developed, and we were told it'll clean up the air, it'll fuel our cars, and at the time the people who were working on it knew that it took more energy to make the ethanol than we would get out of it in our cars. And so there is an analog to this. We need to know what we're going to get out of it in the end.
Who would like to? I see your hand. Let's get an answer to this question first. But I guess this is something.
Yes. So I can. So the question. Do I need to repeat the question, or has that been? So first of all, it's a very sophisticated question, and the top level answer is it goes to one's views of what is the role of fossil fuels going forward, and if one's views are fossil fuels are quickly going to be taken out of the energy mix, then that is the question. Why would society go to all this additional effort and cost to decarbonize this energy sector? And there are states, so California has adopted a law that says by 2045, all electricity has to be low carbon or zero carbon. And there are other states like that out there. But even the federal government forecasts that coal usage will be 18% of the energy system, even in 2050. So if you take the view that fossil fuels are still going to have a long run, and you're worried about climate change, then just letting these systems continue to run is also not an acceptable answer. It's actually worth taking some additional cost to get the carbon down. At the source, what you've identified is parasitic load. So when you put that CO2 capture onto the power plant, that some portion of that energy output is going to that capture system. But the U.S. Department of Energy is separately funding research, as Scott mentioned, on the capture piece to bring those parasitic loads down. Here in Wyoming, we already have that pipeline infrastructure. There are compression costs associated with it. So yes, so it will take additional energy to do this, but that energy would go for the societal good, ultimately, of reducing CO2 emissions. But if your view is that fossil fuels are going to be transitioned out by 2030 or 2035, then it's a fair question to say, why would we spend the next decade on this? But it's a fundamental question.
I guess I would say, what are these companies or entities going to do for our community, and the coal mines and their investments in our community and the jobs they provide and the donations they give to community groups. Can these entities come here and say they're here for the long term and here for our community, not just to put this in the ground and walk away?
Okay.
I'm assuming that for Gillette, it would be minimal, but any additional, all those things you think about with oil, gas, and coal, you know, roads, dust, air pollution, increased population, whether anything, all that stuff, whether there would be, yeah, general community impacts, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just need to have some handle on what that would be.
Okay. Yeah, so Kip, what I heard there is environmental and social impacts, economic impacts. What are those? Infrastructure. Thank you.
Workforce training.
Workforce training, here we go. Anything else? Other questions or other things? Yep.
Maybe I missed it, but I don't think I heard how you are going to ensure it doesn't escape. I mean, you said you're gonna put it way down deep and underneath some, what do you call it? Barriers. Super seals, but,
So I'll take a run at that, and then I'm gonna defer to Scott. First of all, for this project, we are years away from that, if ever. We're in a phase where
yeah.
they're gonna drill a test well, so then, subject to us winning future rounds, subject to Congress future appropriations, subject to Basin Electric saying, yes, we wanna go forward with this, so that question is contingent upon a lot of this. But the short answer is that this project, the permits for this project would not be granted without a technical showing that that would not happen, that those risks would be to minimize within all known regulatory standards. And EPA, for 10 years, has their entire regulatory program is focused around, not exclusively, but the protection of underground sources of drinking water. Because in the subsurface, that is the predominant environmental receptor that regulators are worried about. If this project, subject to all these contingencies, 10 years down the road, they apply for that permit, and it would be a question, I'm not certain what entity would be applying for that, whether it would be Basin or somebody else, but they would have to demonstrate that there was no endangerment to any underground source of drinking water. And if there was, that the permit would not be granted and the project would not go forward.
So Kip, I think the question we need to capture there is endangerment to drinking water.
Yeah.
Right? So one way I look at it, and of course this is a major portion of the feasibility study, is how safe is it to put it down there? And so we will be looking at that exact question. But one way I look at it as these reservoirs have held oil and gas for millions of years. Oil is a buoyant fluid, just like CO2. So we're using these same reservoirs that have demonstrated that they can hold geologic fluids for millions of years. So that gives me a little confidence that we can put CO2 down there and it'll stay, but it's certainly a question we need to answer in feasibility.
And this is a public feasibility study, so if we see that something could leak, we'd say it. We'd say this is not a good spot to do this, so.
I'd like to see a consideration of the comparative potential for space efficiency of power production relative to renewables.
When you say space, what do you mean by physical space?
Physical space. Like our large coal mines take up a lot of space, but when you compare it to the power production that they produce compared to producing solar or wind power for the same amount of power generation, quite efficient.
So I wrote that down as physical space of fossil versus renewables.
With carbon or sequestration included.
Okay.
A two-part question. One is, and you alluded to it earlier, who owns the CO2 once it's determined that it's a commercial project? Who owns that CO2? And the second part is this only for dry fork, or will we be bringing CO2 in to store if it's commercial?
What was the second part of it?
So the second part is if, not if, once it's successful, and we can store CO2 here, is it just for dry fork station, or is it a major depository for other CO2?
So I'll take the first question. So who owns the CO2? So let me phrase that slightly differently. So the way the law phrases it is who's responsible for it. And the Wyoming statute says the company, the entity that is injecting it is responsible. So it would be, I don't know who that entity would be, but whoever is legally responsible for that injection well would be legally responsible for it under Wyoming law. Now that would be the case for fee land on state land, so that's an interesting question. So let's say you did this on state lands in Wyoming. Does that mean, the Office of State Lands and Investment is the responsible entity? If you did this, on federal surface, the law is unclear. The federal government hasn't clarified these issues under federal law. And then I think the answer with respect to what we have to do under this grant is demonstrate the feasibility of a storage capability of a maximum volume, but it doesn't necessarily have to be from any particular source. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, the grant defines commercial scale as 2 million tons per year for 25 years. So that's the minimum we need in order to meet the qualifications of the grant. Now that is dependent, so for 2 million tons per year, that's about 70% of what Dry Fork emits each year. Now I think what we'll find when we start doing the economics behind this, we'll find that it's a lot better to use that CO2 for enhanced oil recovery and then put it in the ground. If we can make money off it, it just makes more business sense. So would it be a regional repository? Probably we would use it for enhanced oil recovery opportunities regionally before using it as some sort of surge tank for later use or for permanent storage.
Could I ask a question that I should have asked earlier, which is when these phase 1 projects are shut down and then phase 2 projects are shut down, does that information go to the remaining? Like if we go on to phase 3, can you get information from the phase 2s that got shut down before around the country? Or is that like private information of some sort? That has nothing to do with social license, I'm sorry.
They're publicly funded, so all data is shared through the DOE with anybody that wants to take a look. So there are earlier stage phase 2 projects than ours that started over 2 years ago, and you can go on the website and you can learn all that they have with respect to the drilling and subsurface data. Good question.
We haven't heard tonight is about Boundary Dam in Saskatchewan. What have you learned from that project, and is there any comparison to what you're doing?
So do you want me to take a run at that? So the question was, what have we learned from the Boundary Dam project in Canada? That's also a very sophisticated question. So there are comparable projects like this around the world. So this isn't the first time this has been done. One of which is in Boundary Dam. Boundary Dam is a coal-fired power plant in Ontario.
Saskatchewan.
Okay, and they've done CO2 capture there with sales to EOR. And I think it's fair to say I can't recite all the current, the actual status of it, but it's had somewhat of an up and down history. You can read favorable articles, negative articles. So what we have learned from that, and we've met, Scott and I and Fred have met with counterparts from Canada at a regional meeting in the Pacific Northwest. There is a group in Canada called the International Knowledge Center on Carbon Capture and Storage that we are communicating with. They have published a lot of their data. So yes, we are cognizant of what they've done, and all those reports are part of our knowledge base going forward. I will say this, and again, I think analogies are always helpful. So sometimes I think part of this is that we're at Kitty Hawk. When was Kitty Hawk? Was that like 1907 or something? And so, that literally paper airplane out of balsa wood has gone 200 feet down the beach. And then people will say, well, where's the 747? Where's that? So I think there are these first of a kind projects that are expensive, there are problems, and that's kind of how science is advanced. But the short answer to your question is we're cognizant of that, we have the reports, and we're communicating with them, and we'll learn from it.
What I would like to know is, would all of the carbon dioxide emissions from the dry fork station be used in enhanced oil recovery, or are there other uses that can be developed here in the Gillette area?
So the question is, are there other uses for the CO2 from Dry Fork Station or maybe elsewhere, aside from CO2 oil recovery? And absolutely, that's one of the neat things going on at Dry Fork Station right now with the Integrated Test Center. They're trying to capture flue gas CO2 and turn that into different carbon products, anywhere from building material to plastics. So absolutely, carbon is a unique product, and different people are trying to do different uses with it.
Let me also make a plug for the carbon engineering program that's ongoing at the School of Energy Resources, who is looking at utilizing the carbon in coal before it is burned and before it is turned into CO2. So that's also ongoing research down at SCR.
The sequestration underneath the land, for the landowner, is that going to be considered a mineral right, or how do the rights to that spelled out?
So the question is,
and how do you protect your landowner right if you own land, so that someone who drills on theirs, I mean, and they're filling up all underneath your land too with their CO2. I mean, how do we develop the legal, or has that already been addressed with the rights?
So the question, generally a very sophisticated one again, about how have these issues about subsurface pore space ownership been resolved? And the answer is a handful of states, of which Wyoming is one, have enacted statutes. But because this is really not happening yet commercially, those have really not yet been implemented. So there aren't court cases out there where someone is claiming, well, you infringed upon my storage rights. But we do have a rule book in the statute, and that's a huge head start. So that's sort of question number one. So answer number two is that in Wyoming, on fee land, if you own the surface, you own the pore space. So if this project were to go forward, and that's subject to all sorts of ifs, we're looking at 2025, 2030, before the project proponents could get a permit, we would have to have a showing that we had acquired all the pore space rights. So if you were—
Like water rights?
Well, it would be pore space rights. So we're going deep. We're not, first of all, we have to separately have a showing that we were not endangering underground sources of drinking water. We have a separate legal showing that we've acquired these storage rights. So we would have to come to you and say, okay, we've modeled our plume, and a quarter square mile of it, 1.5 miles deep, is going to be under your surface. And then you're going to hire your lawyer, and then you're going to say, I think my pore space is worth X. And we're going to say, no, we think it's worth Y. And then that'll be a negotiation. And these cases aren't I was once an expert witness in the Permian Basin where this issue came up, that the surface was saying, pay me. And, I have a right. And so, yeah, that would be a negotiation. But, except for a handful of cases like this in the Permian Basin, there just really isn't kind of a record of that. But all that would have to be resolved. And if they weren't resolved, then the project would not happen here. They would have to move, or they would have to change the injection well. They'd move it over 1 mile. So it was avoiding your land. you know? It's kind of like the holdout for the highway, you know, I'm not gonna, you can't condemn my land. Well, then we'll just build it 10 feet over here to the right. I mean, but that would be a commercial negotiation.
Pore space with the mineral right holder though?
The pore space, now in Wyoming law, the pore space on fee land is owned by the surface, and it's separate from the mineral rights. But Wyoming law also says if there is a dispute between the owner of a storage right and the mineral estate dominates. So at the end of the day, no one's gonna go to an oil and gas operation and say, hey, you know, nice job, but you know, the storage company's coming in, have a nice day. It won't work that way. That oil and gas will still be produced, and that storage interest would have to say how their operations are not going to interfere with those productive mineral operations.
But if the surface owner doesn't own the mineral right, would the mineral right holder have the right to the pore space?
No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the well that you're injecting this into. You know, they don't recognize property lines. I mean, it can go under all kinds of different people's property, and unless you have, I don't know how much it costs to drill a 10,000 foot well, like $10 million. I mean, to prove that they're storing it underneath your. I don't know. You get all the, you know, the old stories of people, you know, landowners getting together at the fence line and beating each other up over the water rights. I don't know if they're gonna someday be doing that over the carbon storage rights underneath there.
I think that's a long way down the road.
It's
a long way down the road.
That'd be entertaining.
Yeah.
I want to go back to social license, and my expectation is that the result of much of this research is going to be positive. And we've talked so much about local impact, but I'm not nearly as interested in local impact as I'm interested in world impact. We're going to have state impact, we're going to have national impact, we're going to have world impact. That's where my decision about social license is going to be.
In what ways? What do you mean? Can you be more specific? In what ways are you envisioning world impact?
Well, I'm not sure it's that difficult to explain. If you take coal, for instance, which is so abundant, and you make it much cleaner and greener to burn, and you can continue, and we can ship coal all over the world because of this technology we've created. They continue to have a relatively low cost source of energy for whatever they're doing. We're selling a lot of coal, we're selling our technology, and eventually that CO2 that we've stored may also be useful in other business enterprises. And it seems to me like when you can utilize the energy capabilities that are already here, instead of using all that energy to build windmills and photocells, things like that, there's a great positive impact worldwide to that.
Other comments or questions? I was gonna add, now that we're on general questions, I thought I'd do social licensing. I'd love to see informative meetings like this as the project goes forward. I would especially love, with interpretation, to see the computer models when they become available. Okay. Like, okay, the pressure, and you did frack the rock, you know, and that kind of stuff. That would be really exciting to keep informed on as that goes on.
Gene, can I ask one? Is this the best type of forum to do that in at the library here? Can I just throw that out to where can we come and talk to you guys when we have results? Here? Perfect.
All right, it's a date.
Other.
Yeah, just a question. back on the chemistry of the storage. And it goes back to the water. So you pump it down. If it does get into your drinking water, you get carbonic acid and then bicarbonate and hydrogen ion and then HCO3. What does it actually do to the water? What if it did get to your drinking? What does it do to mess up the water? Or does it really mess up the water? I don't know.
Can I add to that question?
Yeah.
If you're going to be displacing the liquid that is there, I'd like to know where's it going and what are some of the positives maybe, or what are some plans for that water? So, but just as an add-on to your question.
So let me take the first one. The HCO3 is the CO2, right? So if it goes into the aquifer, it becomes bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is a natural anion that you would see in your drinking water aquifer. If you turn on your tap water runs out. That's groundwater, it has CO2 in it. The CO2 comes out, when it comes out of your spigot, it degasses, right? And so it makes the pH raise a little bit. So you can see any spigot in your house, if you go inspect it, you'll start to see that mineral buildup right there. That's exactly what it'll do in your aquifer. It gets in there, it's going to degas out a little bit, you're gonna get carbonate minerals forming in your aquifer.
Did your question get answered?
Is water still drinkable?
Water's still drinkable.
Right. Worst thing it does is it goes back in the atmosphere.
Right.
That's like
Yep.
Sam still agreed on.
Yeah. Correct, yeah, or you could have some really bubbly water,
But again,
but it wouldn't get to that
But I'm
point.
gonna jump in here as Scott's lawyer. If there's a risk of that, this project would not happen.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, the entire regulatory framework under federal law is that there has to be a technical showing up front that there is no endangerment to any underground source of drinking water. So I consider that's kind of a theoretical,
That's true.
Chemistry answer, but that, that is never, that's a failure of the regulatory system if you get to that point. And for the projects like this that are going worldwide, and there are now, there's 10, 20, I had a slide on this, but I didn't have time to go over it. The primary risk with these projects generally for these tests that they have is you have a failure of cement or some issue in the injection well. So they're not seeing, it's this sort of broad scale migration up towards the surface, and it makes sense. It's where you've got a penetration, and for some reason the cement job wasn't done right, and they can detect a little fingering up of CO2 in the annulus of that well. So then you go back in and recomplete that well, but it's kind of those penetrations that are the risk points as opposed to, so again, those drinking water resources are the focus, that is the environmental receptor that's being protected here. So that would be a major problem if you ever sort of got any minute amount of CO2 in one of those aquifers. And first of all, the project, if that was actually demonstrated, it would be shut down. No one's gonna say, EPA is not gonna say, oh, well, it's all gonna balance out and don't worry about it. It'll be shut down. It will be shut down.
Excellent. So Gene's question was, what would happen to displace brines during CO2 injection?
I also want to know what you can do with that water. What's the quality of that water, and what's the thinking around what you might do with that water and cleaning it up, because it could be a huge benefit. That's my assumption.
It's a good assumption. It's actually part of this project. So one of the reasons we'll collect brine in the subsurface is to determine, what are the character of those brines, and if we start to displace some of those brines, will we need to produce them, and if we need to produce them, what can they be used for? There's certainly many different uses, both industrial and domestic uses of groundwater that we will explore. We'll model the economics thereof of cleaning up those waters.
Is anything going on?
Yeah, let me.
Are you planning for this? You're saying, yes, this water's gonna be great, but
We don't know.
But what's the thinking? What's your thinking?
So there are minerals of values in brines. So one thing we'll look at for this is we'll look at what's dissolved in those brines. There could be things like lithium, there could be things like rare earth elements, It could be things like salts, iodine. So if that's the truth, then instead of having just one injection well, we might have a brine production well that removes the water first and then allows us to put that CO2 into that pore space. And that water at the surface would have value. This is just what if. It's one of the research questions.
I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative. What about Flint? You're very confident in the ability of the federal regulatory umbrella to protect people, and I want to understand your confidence, and I want to understand the sense of where there have been failures. How do you respond to that?
So I think everyone should be cynical and skepticism, and obviously there are terrible situations like Flint.
Western Wyoming, what's that area?
Pavilion.
Thank you.
Correct.
Where the ball's been dropped completely.
And so I think Scott and Fred might be able to address so I can't sit up here and say, what I can tell you is what the regulations are. And I can't, but, correct. And so those are great questions. The other thing that you need to know, and you can interpret this in different ways, I mentioned these federal regulations for the reduction of underground sources of drinking water. The Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality in January of last year, a year ago, has applied for what's known as primacy. They've applied with federal EPA to be the direct regulator. So this may be Wyoming DEQ in 2025 or 2030 that is making these assessments about underground sources of drinking water, as opposed to EPA Region 8 or EPA in Washington D.C. So I don't have a good answer for you. Those are.
So I set out my colleagues a little bit with that, but meetings like this, where the public is involved, is one answer, isn't it? Because you're involved in the process from the start to the finish, and I think that is one advantage of what's going on here, is that this is phase 2, certainly, but it's available, and I'm just amazed at the interest, and I would just encourage the continuation of that, because it's public involvement that can answer some of that. But the reason I posed the question is because Mark Northam, who directs the School of Energy Resources, has talked about being extremely excited about what the water, the possibilities of the water that comes out of this. You had a comment?
Yeah, this is probably for Kip too. What would the tax liabilities be for companies in the future if they use the CO2 as a product and sell it for oil enhancement and that? Because there might be possibly some revenue for the university here.
Are there any tax-related benefits associated with the beneficial use of CO2?
For the public to use for schools
So there is Wyoming does not have tax incentives per se. Texas does, for example. Texas, if you use anthropogenic, if you use industrial CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, the oil and gas company receives a tax benefit, but that's a benefit to the oil and gas company. I'm not certain whether that actually could be fairly construed as a public benefit. I guess for more jobs, you could say, but that's a benefit to the oil and gas company.
I mean, the benefit for the state.
Oh, for the state. So, absolutely, that could be you could under current law that it doesn't work that way, but Wyoming could think of, are there ways in which, if this were to take off, that a taxation regime could be applied to provide revenues for. Part of our team here is Ben Cook, a professor from the College of Business, and he's already done really good economic modeling on what a project like this might look like. And I think in next phases he'll be looking a little bit about broader labor impacts. So that will be an issue that will be discussed and researched going forward. At the moment, I don't have a good answer for you, but it certainly is a possibility.
When you're asking about the social license, just an observation, I think you guys better get used to having people asking about the safety. Because, I mean, you guys went through it in great detail about how the 5,000 foot thick thing and all the layers and how it plugs itself. And we're here talking about it, and we're still asking about that. So all the other thousands of people who aren't here getting the information we have, you know, it sounds like that's going to be one of the main social licenses that, or the hurdle to get over, that convincing everybody that, you know, it's just totally safe to do it.
Right. That's the research component to it, right? That's why we're doing the research, to figure out what those are, what those safety issues are.
Yep.
Other comments or
People believe
questions?
what they want to believe.
Yeah, that's true.
I do want to give everybody on the panel an opportunity for a final thought. And we're here for, you know, one-on-one questions and comments as well. But maybe if there's anything, is there anything anybody would like to add?
I'll just say this has just been a real privilege, and you have my personal commitment. I mean, I have a stack of business cards, and you already know I'm not the geologist. If you want to talk about pore space, I'm not the guy. But
But you know the guy.
Right, I know the guy. But I will come up here literally anytime to talk to anybody, because these meetings are completely invaluable. And without, as Jessica said, without your consent, then this project won't go forward, and it shouldn't go forward. But you know, I don't want to be a person sitting in Laramie, you know, coming up once a year and having a meeting like this. I'd like to come up here once a month and talk to the Rotary Club, talk to the Chamber of Commerce, talk to whomever. So I just am appreciative to be here, and thank you all for showing up. That's what I want to say.
So we had a comment here.
When, of course, it's going to be all finished up and CO2 is on the market or being injected, what sort of jobs does that create, and what sort of education do we need to be thinking about? Is that oil and gas drilling people or something else?
Yeah, so the first part of operations are very analogous to oil and gas operations. So a lot of the skills Wyomingites already have for, you know, the subsurface energy market can be applied to building out projects such as these. And that's on the front end. Lawyers will obviously get paid. I mean, that's on the front, middle, and back end. So, social sciences.
So can I just add a tidbit here? So I was in Stanford, we were on Stanford's campus 2 weeks ago, having a very similar conversation, and the general knowledge about energy in this room is 3 notches above what we were talking about at Stanford. So it's always a pleasure to come up here, because the people here get it. They really do. And fossil fuel and coal is part of our, it's part of our economic backbone, it's part of our lifestyle. We all grew up with it. And if we want to continue the lifestyle that we have and the economics that those bring in, I mean, this is a technology that can get us there.
Just in terms of last thoughts, I just wanted to say that I told you this is the first time I'm hearing all of it, and I'm excited about this too. So if there's anything that the Ruckelshaus Institute can do to help with this conversation, keeping this going as it goes through the remainder of the phases, let us know how we can help.
Sure, I'd like to say that one of the best parts of my job is when I actually get to be helpful every once in a while on a larger scale, besides for writing a paper that 15 people might read. So this is absolutely really, it's a lot of fun for us, and we get to work with a lot of people locally, and we get to learn and a lot of stuff that we don't always do, because we get to learn more about the challenges that way, so thank you.
More than that, this is the land grant mission, and I direct the new Office of Engagement and Outreach, and that is an outgrowth of the new strategic plan breaking through. So goal 3 is impacting communities. So there's a wide variety of conversations. But this is an example of how we want to see some Saturday use addressing issues of particular importance to the communities where we come. Thank you for having us.